The title of my talk is Does Health Drive Retirement or Retirement Drive Health? And I just want to acknowledge my co-author, Hyeran Chung, who's from UT El Paso. So this is joint work that we've been doing. And I'll start with a little bit of motivation and an overview. So there is a large literature showing that health shocks are an important driver of retirement. Theoretically, a health shock can increase your cost of effort, right? It may make working more difficult for you. It may also reduce your productivity and earnings, and that might cause someone to reduce their labor supply or even retire. There's a large literature establishing this link. There's also a smaller literature that looks at spillovers within households of the impact of health shocks. In other words, does one spouse's health shock affect the retirement decision of the others? But it turns out that retirement can also have an impact on health, and there's a large literature looking at this as well. And there are many channels that suggest that retirement may improve health. For example, after you retire, you may experience less stress, you may have more time to exercise, you may have more time to invest in health. There are also channels that suggest that retirement could worsen health. Maybe you have less desire to invest in health because you're not working anymore, and the primary purpose of investing in health is to boost productivity. Maybe you have less social interaction. Maybe you have less of a sense of purpose. If your job was physically demanding, maybe you have less physical activity. Now, when you look at the correlation in the data, retirement is pretty strongly negatively correlated with health. We know theoretically that the causation runs in both directions. Statistically, though, it's dominated by that first direction, where retirement shocks or health shocks seem to cause retirement. So the purpose of our work in this paper is to use panel data from the health and retirement study to carefully examine this endogenous relationship. And our goal is to use a consistent methodology and sample for both directions of causation to kind of illustrate in a transparent way what that endogenous relationship is. And then we also kind of separately examine the impact of spousal health shocks on retirement. Okay, so I assume everyone in this room is familiar with the health and retirement study, so I'll keep this brief. The HRS is a panel survey representative of the US population aged 51 and older and their spouses. We select a sample of people who entered the survey in their first wave in the survey at ages 51 through 59. We impose a further restriction that they were working full-time in their first wave and that they had not recently experienced a health shock, which we define as a self-reported worsening of health in the past 2 years. And we're going to focus on health shocks and retirements that occur at or before age 65. So this is kind of relatively early in the so-called retirement years. But most people, it turns out in the sample, do retire at or before 65, but there are people who delay till later, and that's going to be important for our empirical strategy because that gives us a never treated group. And we differentiate retirements along 2 dimensions. So first, we look at the person's self-reported reason for retirement. So if someone in the HRS reports that they retired, they are asked why they retired, and health is one of many possible reasons that they could cite. In addition, if someone reports changing jobs, the HRS asks them if health played a role in that transition. So we use those variables to differentiate whether a retirement or job transition, for example, from full-time to part-time, may have occurred for health reasons. So these are self-reports. We also differentiate retirements by their timing. So the HRS in each wave asks respondents for their planned or intended retirement age, and we capture that variable in each respondent's first wave in the survey. And then we look at whether their eventual retirement occurs before that age or after that age. So an early retirement occurs before your planned retirement age. An on-time retirement or a non-early retirement occurs either at or after your planned retirement age. So those are the dimensions that we differentiate retirements along. And The general methodology that we used is a staggered difference in differences approach based on the work of Callaway and Santana in 2021. And so to examine the first direction of causation, does health cause retirement? The treatment in this specification is a health shock. So we define a health shock as a self-reported worsening of health, right? So each person is asked in each wave, has your health improved, stayed the same, or worsened since the last wave? So if they say it worsened, we call that a health shock. And the treatment we define as the first observed health shock for each person. And so that's our key treatment variable. The dependent variables that we examine are transitioning to retirement, transitioning away from full-time work, so stopping full-time work, or transitioning away from all work. Okay, and retirement is self-defined. Do you consider yourself retired? So you may still be working part-time, but consider yourself retired. And we differentiate by whether the transition occurs for health reasons, whether the respondent cites health reasons for the transition or not, or whether it occurs early or not. And essentially, not to get in too much into the weeds of this empirical strategy, but what we're going to be doing is comparing people who experience a health shock before age 65 to a never-treated group who did not experience a health shock before age 65. And we're going to look at the evolution of their labor market transitions. Okay? And the Callaway and Santana approach accounts for the fact that people experience these health shocks at different times. In other words, there is staggered treatment. So for the other direction, when we want to look at whether retirement causes health, the treatment in this case is retirement, and we define this as either self-reported retirement, stopping full-time work, or stopping all work. And we, again, look at the first reported retirement that we observe in the data. We compare those who are observed to retire at or before age 65 to those who are not observed to retire at or age 65. So that's a never-treated group. The dependent variables in this specification include self-reported health measured in standard deviations from the mean on a Likert scale, the number of doctor visits, the number of diagnosed health conditions, a dummy for whether you engage in regular vigorous exercise, and indicators for whether you are currently smoking or drinking. To deal with the endogeneity here, because we know that retirement or health also causes retirement, we drop all individuals who ever report that they retired or switched jobs for health reasons. Okay, so that's one way to deal with the endogeneity. The other way we deal with the endogeneity is we drop people who retire earlier than planned, because as it turns out, these early retirements are associated with health shocks. So, a few basic results. What we find here is that health shocks are associated, if you can see here, when the health shock occurs, they are associated with an increase in the probability of transitioning to retirement, and this is self-reported retirement. The results are similar for the other definitions of retirement. So there's a large increase in the probability of retiring and citing health reasons for it. There's also a large increase in the probability of retiring early that occurs upon experiencing the health shock. In terms of the magnitudes, it's about a 4 percentage point increase in the probability of retiring either for health reasons or retiring early. That's more than a doubling of the base rate of health-related retirements and a 56% increase in the probability of retiring early. We also see that health shocks are not associated with an increase in the probability of retiring for non-health reasons and retiring not early, so either at your planned retirement age or after your planned retirement age. So that gives us a little bit of, it kind of validates these self-reported reasons for retirement in the HRS, right? So the health-related retirements do really seem to be driven by health shocks. The early retirements do really seem to be driven by health shocks, and if somebody does not retire early and does not report a health-related retirement, it doesn't look like those retirements are associated with health shocks. And like I said, we also look at spousal health shocks, the impact of a spousal health shock on retirement. Spousal health shocks do seem to have a smaller impact on a person's retirement. We do estimate that there is a small delayed increase in the probability of retiring for non-health reasons. So that increase occurs about 3 waves in, so about 6 years in. Similarly, there's a small delayed increase in the probability of retiring earlier than planned, right? So again, this occurs a few waves in the future. And this kind of, to us, this kind of seems plausible. Maybe your spouse experiences a health shock and you initially try to manage it without exiting the workforce. But if your spouse's health continues to deteriorate or the health shock persists, maybe there are more caregiving demands and you eventually exit the labor force. But it's a smaller effect, and these are typically non-health related, right? Not related to your own health, but they do seem to be early. Now, what about the other direction? What is the impact of retirement on health? So here you see our estimates of the impact of retiring for non-health related reasons on the various health outcomes that we consider. And the 2 things that we note here are, upon retiring for non-health reasons, you do see a temporary increase in self-reported health of about 1/10 of a standard deviation. So it's modest, but it does occur, and it seems to occur in the wave after retirement, but then it kind of dissipates. There's also about a 5 percentage point increase in the probability of engaging in vigorous exercise that persists for a few waves. That's about a 13% increase relative to the base rate. We don't see much going on for the other health outcomes, and we see a similar pattern for the non-early retirements. Those are also associated with an improvement, a modest temporary improvement in self-reported health, and an increase in the probability of vigorous exercise. So similar impacts for non-early retirement, so I won't go too much into detail there. So let me just summarize and conclude. So overall, health shocks are associated with about a 40% increase in the probability of retirement overall. Respondents tend to cite health reasons for their retirement and to retire earlier than planned. Spousal health shocks are associated with about a 10% increase in the probability of retirement. Respondents retire earlier than planned, but they do not cite health reasons. And finally, non-health related and non-early retirements are associated with an increase in vigorous exercise and a temporary improvement in self-reported health. So I will stop there. Thank you.